It's 5:31. Let's try to go ahead and get started on time. I think, Ann, you had somebody who was going to call the roll for us.
Hi, Reed. Jesse Hernandez here. I'll be doing the roll call today.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon. Following is the roll call for today's meeting. I will call you in alphabetical order by your first name. Reed.
Here.
Eloisa. Al. Anita. Anthony. Andy. I think I see Andy there waving. Anne Marie.
Present. I'm here.
Thank you. Kurt.
Yes, I'm here.
Dana.
I'm here.
Dee Dee. Jack. Jim. John. Michael Kinnick.
Present.
Michael Sanchez.
Present.
Norman. Dr. Femi.
Present.
Peter.
I'm here.
Seymour. And last but not least, Wayne. Okay, thank you. Now, if you will please join me for the invocation. Dear Lord, we thank you for the many blessings you have freely given to each of us. We ask for your presence to guide this meeting of the CPS Energy Rate Advisory Committee. We ask that you provide everyone with the knowledge, compassion, and wise counsel needed as they discuss the business matters on the agenda today. Help us all to remember that we are stewards acting on behalf of our customers and provide us with the grace to serve all people well. We ask this in your name. Amen. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Rudy.
Okay. Yes, Chair Williams, do you have any opening comments you'd like to make, sir?
No, sir. We just want to hear from you guys. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Well, I am here to introduce and to begin our educational lecture number one. We're going to be presenting you with some really what we consider to be very introductory baseline information, and we're going to do that as a team. I'm going to start off. I'm going to hand it over to Corey Kaczynski. We're then going to hand it over from there for a rate conversation with Chad Hoopengardner, and we'll finally end the CPS Energy portion of tonight's program with Rick Luna, who will talk to you about our energy efficiency and demand response programs. And then we will turn it over to the Brattle Group, who have a broader perspective presentation for you tonight about utility rate structures and some really good information. So we really hope that you enjoy the information that we have for you this evening. Next slide, please. Again, this is our agenda for this evening. I went over that a little while ago, so I'm not going to belabor the point. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start off just talking very generally about CPS Energy and our business model. There's a lot of intricacies in the way that our owner, the city of San Antonio, when they borrowed money to buy CPS Energy assets, way back in the 1940s, set us up in certain ways to ensure that we were focused on the business of providing utility service. So I'm going to walk you through some of those aspects of our business model that are quite unique to San Antonio, and then I'll turn it over to Corey. Next slide, please. So this is a slide really that we show pretty frequently at our community meetings, where we just talk about kind of the scale of CPS Energy. We are absolutely the largest municipally owned electric and gas utility in the United States. On the electric side, I think LADWP is larger, and on the gas side, Philadelphia, I believe their gas system is the largest, but CPS Energy is the largest combined electric and gas utility in the country. Largest solar production in Texas, fifth in the nation. We're the second largest wind power producer in Texas. We, for many, many years, going on 2 decades now, CPS Energy has been on a path to increasing the renewable portion of our portfolio, but we are a very highly diversified utility overall with respect to the types of generation resources that we have access to. But the only type of generation we don't have access to is hydro, because we don't have the geography for that here in our region. But we pretty much do everything else. Very, very strong credit ratings, still some of the highest in the industry. We have seen some negative outlooks, particularly by Moody's, just resulting from the impacts of the pandemic and some other factors that the credit rating agencies are paying attention to. But certainly our credit rating allows us to borrow at lower costs, which means we have more capacity to take the fund we have available between the equity that we put in and the debt financing that we carry to be able to invest in our infrastructure. So our dollar goes further because of those very favorable credit ratings. Roughly 1.2 million customers, 885,000 on the electric side, 367,000 on the gas side, and we are got a lot of assets, $11.5 billion in total assets. That's power plants, steel in the ground, poles, wires, and all the trucks and equipment that we use to maintain our system, and $2.5 billion in annual revenue. And of course, we've got 3,000 dedicated employees that are focused on serving our community each and every day. Next slide, please. We always talk about CPS Energy, in terms of our thought leadership in our industry. This is just a cross section of the awards that we received in 2020. We're very proud. This is a reflection of the great work that our employees do each and every day. The Shining City award that we got last year from Environment Texas is just an example of the types of commitments we're making to doing our jobs in as sustainable a manner as we can. The System Achievement Award by the Texas Public Power Association. You see, awards for our community service from the American Public Power Association. So, we are really trying to do the very best job we can for our community. And when we do that job right, we're recognized by our counterparts across the industry. So this is the list of awards we got in 2020. Next slide, please, Adrian. And again, while 2021 has been, quite a challenging year, we've continued to be recognized this year. I'll point out an award that I'm proud of that just came through here recently was HEB, as a result of the work we did with some of our largest customers to try to get them to reduce load during Winter Storm Uri. HEB recently awarded CPS Energy with an appreciation award for our efforts to communicate with them and try to get them off, to reduce their load so that we could get out of that event quicker. We were the only utility in the state of Texas, and HEB pretty much serves everywhere, and they're beginning to move into the Dallas-Fort Worth area now. But we're the only utility that HEB recognized in this manner, and I'm really proud of that, in spite of the many challenges that we saw, during that event. Next slide, Adrian. I want to spend time right up front talking about the many ways that we focus on our customers. These are all the programs that we offer our customers, from the affordability discount that we offer our lowest income customers. Casa Verde is a program that we partner with Bill San Antonio Green to go out and weatherize homes across our community. We have budget payment plans. We have our nonprofit that we partner with the city and county, the Residential Energy Assistance Partnership, that we fund, millions of dollars in assistance to our customers each and every year. The CPS Energy Angels program is a program we just began recently that allows customers, one customer to the other, to offer assistance to customers that are in need directly to offset their bill. And then there's just a host of other programs that we offer that are widely utilized here in San Antonio. So, we have provided the link to where you can find information on these programs, and we've got just a host of energy advisors and customer response unit staff that work every day to try to proliferate these programs throughout our community. And we work with partner agencies across San Antonio to ensure that we are really compounding the available assistance customers have access to. So if they call us, for instance, to find opportunities for billing assistance, we'll connect them with rental assistance, we'll connect them with energy efficiency assistance, we'll connect them with the food bank, whatever their need is. We're trying to connect them in the right ways. And now we're doing an outbound call campaign that I'm very proud of, that we also have recently won an award for, where we're calling customers directly just to find out what their specific needs are so that we can connect them in the right ways. And we're going to continue to do that even as we come out of the pandemic moving forward. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to move into really what amounts to elements of our governance structure. As you can see there, my boss, Paula Gold-Williams, and the CPS Energy staff obviously reports to a board of trustees, which sets policy direction. There are specific things that we have to ask City Council at the City of San Antonio to approve, and I'll go through those in a second. We find ways to garner input from a whole host of community partners. The Citizens Advisory Committee has been around a long time. The Rate Advisory Committee, we're looking forward to the input that you're going to provide to our board as we look to make decisions. And then we have a host of other stakeholders. We got probably a list of 50 to 100 stakeholders that we deal with every day: business community, chambers of commerce, environmental stakeholder group, our solar stakeholder group, school districts, the Educational Alliance, the Manufacturers Association, the Real Estate Council. I can go through a whole list of entities that we talk to and participate with on a regular basis so that we can make sure that we are focused in the right ways of serving our community. Next slide, please. Of course, our current chair, Reed Williams, has been leading an effort at the City of San Antonio on emergency preparedness to really dig into the elements of our response, SAW's response, the City of San Antonio's response, our Emergency Operating Center. We have got a number of requests for information from them that we've completed. I think they're currently in process. That number may be down to 3, and we're getting real close on the rest of them because I believe they're trying to finish their work up here pretty quickly. But we have been engaged at all levels with the Emergency Preparedness Committee, and we look forward to them concluding their work and the report they're going to offer that will give us some very helpful information. Next slide, please. This is my last slide, and then I will turn it over to Corey from here. But as you can see, we've got an independent board of trustees that was set up, when CPS Energy was bought, came into formation by the City of San Antonio. New members are certainly selected by the board through a process, and they and are then ratified by City Council. So City Council basically has an up or down vote on the nominees that are presented for consideration. The mayor serves as a voting ex officio fifth member of City Council. We've got 4 quadrants that represent the geographic areas of the city. The trustees must reside within the quadrant that they serve and be CPS Energy customers. And they serve a 5-year term and are eligible for an additional 5-year term. So they can serve a total of 10 years on our board of Trustees. Per bond ordinance, the City Council has to approve any debt that we issue. Has to go through City Council for approval. Anytime we're going to exercise eminent domain to build infrastructure around the community, which we rarely do. We don't use eminent domain to the extent TxDOT and some of the other entities do, but we do have that tool in our toolbox to the extent we absolutely have to have property to build infrastructure to serve a growing community. Certainly, anytime we are going to have a conversation about rates, the Public Utility Commission of Texas, which approves rates for the independently owned utilities across the state of Texas, they do not have rate making authority for CPS Energy. Our local city council does. And again, as I said, ratification of our board nominees is another responsibility that city council owns. We've also got a council-appointed Citizens Advisory Committee, which was established in 1997. They have been very helpful. They write letters and do resolutions of their own to support or raise concerns about policies that CPS Energy is in conversations with. We present a lot of very critical elements of our operation to the CAC on a monthly basis, and they provide input and ask questions and connect to the community in the ways that we need them to ensure that we're getting feedback real time from folks who are there to represent the community. We have a liaison. They're a liaison between CPS Energy and our customers, and the input they provide is very valuable and is very necessary to make sure that we're doing the right things. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Corey to take us through the next section of our presentation. Corey?
Thanks, Rudy. Appreciate that. And good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and all committee members. Good to be here with you this evening. And like Rudy said, this first part here is really laying some foundational context to the discussion. And I'm going to continue that theme around governance, but kind of hone in on the budget components and where those approvals reside. Rudy already talked about a few of them that you see on the page jumping out there in terms of rate support and debt issuances, requiring both board and city council. The other items that you often hear, at least here recently, are the bottom two in terms of our O&M and capital budget. We have this number of discussions with our board about that, and that is approved annually by our board.
What is R&R? I'm sorry, what is R&R?
Yeah, R&R is repair and replacement account. This is effectively additions to our cash balances for capital projects. I tend to think of it as a savings account, so to speak, that we'll use on large projects. And that's governed by our bond ordinance in terms of us having a requirement to contribute 6% of revenues to every year. Very good. If that answers the question, we can go to the next slide then. So likely you've seen this slide before. This is our guiding pillars. We talk about it at almost every board meeting. They're really important because they help give some context to what influences our decision making here at CPS. And you can see looking left to right, they're all very important elements. Reliability and customer affordability always come up as the top concerns for our customers. But there are other elements around security and safety and environmental responsibility and resiliency that we focus on, and it's about looking at them in balance. And what's most important is that we look at all of these, and they're all underpinned by the financial responsibility and financial health of CPS Energy. And that is something that, is fundamental to the conversation. And in this section, I'll talk a little bit about our focus around financial objectives and so forth. So we can go to the next slide, Adrian. So let's talk about our financial objectives. We said this before, but I thought it was really important to hit on this. At our core, we are a cost recovery business, and we use that phrase purposely. We don't generate profit in the traditional sense. When we have monies coming in and if, the monies aren't going to shareholders, or Wall Street or anything like that, the dollars we spend here stay in the community. And so this model that we have, this municipal model that Rudy teed up and that I'm continuing, it's incredibly unique. And in San Antonio, just being here as long as I've been, it is such a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this company and have this unique business model that allows engagement with the community. And so with that in mind, as we design rates to deliver revenue for us, it's really just delivering revenue that covers our operating expenses, capital investments, paying off our debt holders, which is basically like paying your mortgage every month, and city payment. And that's really how we focus on what our rates need to be and what we need to recover for. So we can go to the next slide, please. So this is a more traditional budget slide, and actually this was presented at our last board meeting, and it'll be presented again at this board meeting. But there's a concept that you'll hear that we talk about. It's called sources and uses of revenue. And conceptually, without looking at the numbers or the colors, what we strive for is that the sources of our revenue, i.e., the revenue we pull in from our customers, should be equal to how we use our revenue, i.e., our expenses we have going out the door. And to the extent that we're using more revenue than we're bringing in, we can either reduce the costs or we can increase the revenue. And the conversation we had last month at our board meeting was this conversation of our bars aren't even in terms of what we're looking at in terms of our future forecasts, in that the sources of revenue were lower than all of the uses we have. And so when that happens, we typically would ask for a rate request. And then that was the phrase we had heard last month, a provisional rate increase. And there's a lot of numbers and colors here, but effectively that is kind of illustrated here. But the broader concept is really understanding that we try and balance the revenues coming in and the expenses, and that's how we're managing the business. Okay, we go to the next slide, Adrian. The next three slides are actually a little more budget oriented, and I'll kind of go through them quickly for the sake of time. There's really what I want to take away from this slide isn't the numbers necessarily, but what makes up revenue when you think of the component parts. And that you can see on the chart, kind of on the bottom part of the slide. A chunk of our revenue, a majority of it, is through our electric sales, from our residential customers and our commercial customers. You can see that's the lion's share. The second bucket of money that comes in as revenue is around our gas business. The third bucket that you sometimes may hear of is wholesale revenues. This is an element of revenue that comes in through participation in the broader ERCOT market in Texas. It's a volatile market in terms of pricing, and it could be volatile in terms of what extra energy we have available to make money. But there's a real benefit to participating in that, because to the extent we actually earn dollars in that market, it can help push out or offset any future rate request. And over the last 7 years, which is how long it's been since we've had one, we've had a couple of good years in between that have helped allow us to stretch out how long it's been since our last request. And so those are the main components, I think, from this slide. Can we go to the next slide, Adrian? I was talking about the uses of revenue, on the other slide. There's really, again, same concept. Don't need to go into numbers as much here, but understanding how our dollars flow. When they come in the door, how do we use each dollar? And there's a sequence to that, and that's outlined in our bond ordinance, as Rudy talked about. And those are the 5 items you see listed there. We spend, in priority, dollars on our operating expenses first, then dollars towards our debt requirements, which, as I mentioned earlier, is paying off your mortgage payment every month, so to speak. And then there's that R&R that I mentioned earlier, repair and replacement account, and we're required to put 6% of revenue into that account, which, again, I kind of look at very simplistically as a savings account for longer term investment. Then fourth on that list is city payment, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And anything that we may have left after all of those have been met will go back into our savings account. And ultimately, those are dollars that we can use to reinvest in in our future investment. So with that, I think those are kind of the main conceptual takeaways. We go to the next slide, Adrian. Again, these are our operating expenses. There's a little more detail here. I think for the purposes of tonight, I'll keep flowing. Go to the next slide, Adrian. We do want to spend a little bit of time just to get some context as to the city payment. We talked about it a lot.
I had another question. What is non-fuel O&M, by the way?
Yeah, we can go back to the other slide. Are you referring to that one there, right? So non-fuel O&M is basically all of our operating expenses that are not the cost of fuel.
That's operating and O&M, operating and maintenance. Is that it?
Yes, sir. Yeah, operating and maintenance.
That's my question. Thank you.
Got it. Yes, sir. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Adrian. So we talked about city payment. That is it's a big part of what we do for the community. We have a trend here that goes back to 2010, but the long and short of it is we are proud of the contributions that we make to this community. You can see from the chart, $360 million was our peak back in a couple, 3 years ago. Last year was about 330. The point is that we contribute a large amount of our revenues every year to the city, and that is in return for the investment they originally made for us. We put on there a couple of comparison points between this slide and the next slide. I'll show you a couple of comparisons. We put in there SODs as well, just to show the comparison in size. They have a similar city payment they make as well, but our city payment makes up anywhere from a third or a little bit more of the city's budget every year. Again, really proud of that fact because we do that all at the same time while still having competitive rates. And so we can go to the next slide, kind of punctuate the theme a little bit more. Slide 19.
Corey, this is Adrian. Before we move on, I see Kurt's hand is raised. I think maybe he wanted to ask a question.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yes, thank you. If this is the right time. Just, I may have missed it on the sources and uses, but what's the G&A, either as percentage of revenues or roughly? Is that in the OpEx, the sources and uses, or where is that?
Yeah, I don't have necessarily the percentages. We can get back to you on that. But in terms of the sources, so sources would be how we pull in revenue. The uses would be how we use them. And our operating expenses broadly are a combination of fuel and non-fuel O&M, which is actually, if you harken back to slide 14, I think it is.
Oh, okay. I'll get into. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You're not done. I apologize. No,
it's a subset basically of non-fuel O&M, and I'd have to break that out for you.
Yeah, no problem. I don't need it for now. And okay. Just the R&R has been described as for kind of setting aside cash for longer-term capital projects. So, just maintenance then, is that part of OpEx and not in the R&R?
Yeah, that's our normal. That would be in that non-fuel O&M line item for ongoing operations and maintenance activities.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Kurt. And if you can, just please lower your hand so we can make sure to know when you have your next question.
Will do.
Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, thank you. Hey, yeah, there we go. This is just another comparison slide. This shows other municipally owned utilities and how their city payment compares to CPS Energy's. And the takeaway is you can see that we have one of the highest net city transfers really across the country. And again, we do all this at the same time of maintaining our competitive rates to our customers. So another thing that we continue to punctuate, I don't know if it always gets the attention, but we wanted to share that. Can we go to the next slide, Adrian? So this is the slide. We wanted to put up our municipal business model in contrast to investor-owned utility models. Now, they're both fair models to use, but for us in San Antonio, the real benefits for us is that all of our employees live in the community. We are customers ourselves. The pricing that I described earlier, as you'll learn in the coming presentations, is based on the cost of providing that service. We're not focusing in any extra margin or profit for shareholders or anything like that. And that the revenue that we generate, this is an important point, we say it a lot, is reinvested in our community. So when you pay your CPS bill, it's going towards CPS, and we use those dollars to reinvest in the infrastructure that the city owns. And oftentimes it's going towards local support. So really special business model. And this is one of the reasons I joined this company 15 years ago, because I appreciated how it was designed and what it served. In contrast, we have investor-owned utility models, and as I mentioned, pricing in those types of models is based off a desired profit margin for hitting investor targets or things of that nature. And the profit doesn't necessarily benefit or get reinvested in the community in the same manner that it does with CPS. And ultimately, the infrastructure that's owned by other investor-owned utilities, it's owned by the investor class, whereas in San Antonio, the infrastructure is owned by us, the city. So just wanted to put that out there to kind of just level set the different type of business models. Please go to the next slide, Adrian. This is a slide that we actually pulled from the last presentation I gave to the board in May. We had talked about this financial sustainability approach to kind of clarify what the title means, which basically means with all the challenges that we've been facing, there are two real things that we can do. We can continue to control costs, which we are doing. I mentioned in a previous presentation that since just 2018, we've identified a little over $600 million in current and future savings. But the other element that we had put out there for discussion was this provisional rate increase, which I alluded to earlier. We're using the phrase provisional just for conversation at this point because we haven't declared any rate request. As you know, it's really just a placeholder that we put out there that we include in our financial plan. But again, any type of official request would go through the board and council, as we said numerous times. And the timing of that discussion, of that provisional rate increase, was within the fall of this year. So we can go to the next slide, Adrian, 22.
Corey, I believe Kurt has another question. His hand is raised.
Yes, and I just want to make sure I'm with you. So on these 600 million or whatever cost savings you're alluding to, where do I see those on these slides?
You wouldn't see them on the slides because they've been kind of stripped out of our budget, but they would often be pulled out of the O&M, the non-fuel O&M line item that I mentioned earlier, and it would either be, and also a reduction of any of our capital spend.
Okay, but sort of year over year, the last few years, that hasn't been going down, has it? So you're saying it would have been that much higher?
Yeah, that's
without
correct.
The cost savings. Okay. Wow. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. Got it.
Okay, great clarifying question. Thank you. All right. So there's actually a handful of slides. The next few really try and illustrate the issues the challenges rather we've been having with the pandemic. And the long and short of it is we have a number of customers who are past due on their accounts. There's a lot of numbers on this slide, and even the next slide, Adrian, you can flip to it. And the takeaway, as I mentioned, is that we have about a little over 100,000 customers who are past due. We're increasing at about $4 million a month just as a result of the pandemic. Folks were just falling behind on bills. And it was one of the issues that we brought up at the last board meeting, just highlighting what that impact is. So that is a challenge for us down the road to address. And then we can go to the next slide, Adrian. This merely was just to give some contextual idea of what
Can I get, this is Dana McInnes. Could we go back?
Sure.
And just put that last slide. Is it possible that 56% of the customers in San Antonio are past due? 56% of the residential customers? Is that what you're saying here? They're more than 30 days past due?
I'm sorry, Corey, this is Anita. Actually, I think it was on the previous slide. I think it's 57% of customers are current. And then there's a large percent that's past due and a large percent that qualifies for disconnect. But I wanted to see the percentages. Is that what you were saying?
Well,
yeah,
I just want some clarification here. Are you talking about the total residential is 151 million, but that's 56% of what? Of all the customers in San Antonio?
Are you talking about this number right here, 56? Yeah, so of our total residential revenue, about 56% would be past due. So what the other slide, I guess that I would note is that historically, maybe 10 to 20% would be past due.
Corey, can I help here?
Yeah.
This is accounts receivables. Of accounts receivables, this is the amount that's over 30 days past due. So, every month we issue bills, and those bills, customers pay their bills. So we have, accounts receivables that are outstanding. Of the accounts receivables that are outstanding, 56% of those of the revenue that's outstanding is past due.
Okay, well, that's
the slide's confusing. We'll find a better way to show you these numbers.
so I would like to see a number up there. How many customers of the total number of customers are past due? That's what I'd like to see.
Hi, Corey. This is Anita. I think it's on the previous slide to this.
Right. So this only shows the number of customers eligible for disconnection. But I think Rudy's right. We have another view that I think we can get that can dimensionalize it, and we can take that as an action.
No, this slide shows that 28% are over 30 days past due. The yellow.
That's right. And 15% would be eligible for disconnect if we're disconnecting today.
And then if you look at this in context to that, I guess not the next slide, but the third slide, it really paints a picture. And then we can look at the historical comparison. Yes, right here. So when you put those two charts together, it's shocking.
Yeah, let me just add just a tad bit more context. I talked about the core campaign, our outbound call campaign. We know the customers that are, over 30 days past due. And we're calling, all the customers that are in that category. We have reached approximately 62% of the customers we've actually talked to, put them on payment plans, working with them to try to get their balances down. There's a lot of customers that just won't connect with us that we're working really hard to try to connect with. So, it's interesting. We just went to the board to talk about the idea of going back to disconnection, normal disconnection practices. And the minute that we just talked about potentially disconnecting, we saw, a lot of customers we hadn't talked to who went in and paid. So that's why it's so important that customers contact us who are in this situation where these balances are growing, because all they got to do is call us and we will work with them to ensure that, that we find them help or put them on plans, do what we can to provide assistance. But the longer we go without, disconnecting, the higher these balances are going to continue to grow. That's just the nature kind of our business.
Yeah, let me jump in here a minute if I could, just real quick. We don't have any citizens that signed up today, so we're going to have about 30 minutes, maybe a little more at the end of this. So if we want to try to kind of get the full picture, if we could, at the end of the time, I'll go around and make sure everybody gets to ask their questions. And hopefully you got these slides in advance, so you were able to do it. And let's try it that way, because frankly I can't even see how to hold up my hand on this thing. But maybe y'all figured it out. But
I haven't figured that out either.
All right, well, I'm not alone. And let's go ahead. I'll make sure I call on everybody when we get to the end with the questions, if that's okay right now. We're going to figure this out. It'll get smoother. I apologize for the startup problems we had today, too. So please go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that, Rudy. So we go to the next slide, Adrian. Just have two more. This really was a view that we pulled from the last board meeting as well. This dimensionalized the different, the different challenges that we were describing in previous presentations. It's simply directional. This is our view of what we think the impact of customer affordability would look like with a potential rate request later on in the fall. We show ranges. The key thing is that there's really three buckets of dollars here. The operation and growth, as you see on the left-hand side, this is really to support the ongoing business. It's our blocking and tackling that you would expect, supporting reliability and customer service, infrastructure, growth, all that. We think, total impact for next fiscal year would be about 4 to 4.5%, and you can see the related bad debt recoveries from 1 to 2%. But in this instance, we're projecting that we'd recover that cost over a 5-year time frame, and that would fall off a bill. But again, these are estimates, a big asterisk, as Rudy alluded to. We have not begun disconnects at this point, and we are coming out of COVID, so there could be some upside there. We subtotaled that because those dollars would go towards the core business in terms of supporting our infrastructure. The last bucket there is just a little bit of context. Much of the money, or much of the dollars that you have heard referenced to the Winter Storm Uri are in regards to fuel, which is separate and apart from the dollars that go to support our business, our core business. Typically, we recover our fuel pretty quickly, over 60 to 90 days. What we're suggesting is that when the time comes for us to start recovering those dollars, which we have not begun doing that we would request that we recover that over time. And in this instance, we're looking at over up to 25 years. But another big asterisk here, a lot of these numbers are still under dispute, as you've probably seen in the news. And there are some other options that we need to consider in terms of recovery of these dollars. So all said, we wanted to have that conversation this summer just to show the pressures that we're seeing early on in terms of the impact to customer affordability, which you can see there at the bottom of the page. Majority of this impact, much of it would be in next fiscal year, which is what fiscal 22 and 23 represent. But again, as we've said before, these are all estimates. This is not a declaration of a rate request. This is the beginning of the conversation and sharing with the community what the pressures we're feeling, and so that we can come back after the summer and continue those discussions. But this is really just contextual. So we can go to the next slide, 26. This will be my last slide, just emphasizing that rating agencies are a key stakeholder for CPS Energy. As Rudy alluded to at the very beginning, we had been downgraded by 2 of them to AA-, which is still a strong rating, but nonetheless, these rating agencies are very focused on what's going on at CPS Energy, and they have a keen eye for CPS's relationship with the board and city council and what any type of rate process would eventually look like. And so that is something they keep an eye on. And so with that, I'll wrap up and hand it over to the next section will be Chad Huppengarner.
Thanks, Corey. Good evening, everybody. My name is Chad Huppengarner, and I am the Interim Vice President of Strategic Pricing and Enterprise Risk Management. Strategic pricing, or in other words, rates, that means that we're going to spend a lot of time together this summer, and I'm very excited about that. We'll talk about from the top to the bottom of the rate-making process and why we do it the way we do it, and what some of the objectives are that we try to accomplish with the rate designs that we propose. But I want to take sort of a macro to micro approach with you. Today, I thought I would start at a very high level, an overview of the Texas electric market, and actually there's a little bit of the U.S. electric market in this section that I'm going to talk to. That's important because it impacts how we view ourselves relative to everybody else. So we'll talk about the electric markets and how they function, and we'll talk about competitiveness, how our bill stacks up against other utilities' bills. Adrian, just turn to the next slide. So starting very macro level, across the country, there's 3 interconnections, 3 grids. And of course, you can see it's in various states, and they connect at the dotted lines, right? So there's the west side, the east side, and then there's ERCOT. ERCOT is 100% contained within Texas. It doesn't span any state borders. And that's important from a regulatory aspect. There's very little power that flows across these interconnections, but our interconnection is pretty dang big, and I'm gonna show you that on the next couple of slides. Flip to the next slide if you don't mind, Adrian. In ERCOT, there's really sort of three main players or three main market roles. There's generators, transmission and distribution utilities, or what we call wires, and then there's retailers that sell electricity at the retail level. The generation market, the wholesale electric market, is deregulated. That means the wholesale pricing structure is set up in a way that incentivizes investors to come and build power plants here. And they will operate those power plants whenever it's economically advantageous for them. In other words, whenever they can get a high enough price for the power that they're generating to make it worth their while. Then you got transmission and distribution utilities, the TDUs, big pole, little pole, these are the wires. This part is regulated. All over ERCOT, it's all regulated. Some by the PUC, some by other regulatory bodies like us. Our city council is our regulatory body. And these are very specific ways of setting rates that have to be approved by regulators. The retail sale of electricity, there's both in Texas. There are major areas of Texas, large swaths of Texas that are deregulated, and there are some areas that are regulated. We, of course, are vertically integrated across all of these different buckets. We do all three of these. We operate in both deregulated, all of ours are on the regulated side except for our generation piece. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. So this is sort of a visual representation of what I was showing you on the prior slide. This is Texas, and then the red outline is ERCOT. All of the white space within that red boundary is public power. Those are municipally owned utilities or co-ops. The various colored areas are the deregulated markets within ERCOT, where there is retail competition. And what's depicted here are the colors that represent the major TDUs that operate within those areas. It's really just designed to give you sort of a visual in terms of the space of land in Texas. A lot of it is public power, and a whole lot of it is also open to retail competition. Excuse me. There's some facts in the box on the right that you can read. I know you all got copies of this ahead of time. But the point is, ERCOT is big. So let me show you how big. Adrian, turn to the next slide. What I'm showing here is by state in the U.S., electricity consumption in terawatt hours. Now, a terawatt hour is like 1 billion kilowatt hours. So it's a lot of consumption. It's sorted from highest to lowest. It doesn't show all 50 states because you don't need it to get the point across. Texas is the leftmost bar. We're the blue bar. 425-ish terawatt hours of electricity on an annual basis. That is almost 60% more than the next largest market. That's California. Florida is close. But all that is to say, Texas is a big market because we have very high population. We have a high land mass, very spread out population density, and our weather is pretty unique. We get real cold and we get real hot. Okay, flip to the next slide. So to further dimensionalize that, so we're going from macro to micro, to further dimensionalize that, Texas, relative to global, right, is the 11th largest power market on the face of the earth. We stack up against the countries that you can see sort of to the left of us on this slide. Okay, so Texas is a very lucrative electric market. There's a very unique market structure here in Texas. And if you turn to the next slide, what that creates is a lot of players in Texas. There are dozens and dozens of public power utilities and co-ops that operate in the regulated areas, the white areas that I showed you a couple of slides ago. And there are more than 50 retail electric providers that operate in the deregulated markets in Texas, the areas that were colored in various colors on the prior slide. On this slide, I'm just showing a few logos of some of those retail electric providers. But I think this is important because this sets the stage for how we think about ourselves within this ecosystem of operators within Texas. We benchmark ourselves against all of these different entities. And I'm going to show you that on the next slide. So this is a slide that my team produces on a monthly basis where we go out to the top 20 electric markets in the country and we benchmark ourselves. We assess their electricity pricing and we assess their gas pricing, and we calculate a bill on an apples to apples basis for all of those cities. You can see San Antonio is starred with a little yellow star. I know this is small, I apologize, but you know, the point is we are near the top, which is near the bottom of the pricing. Now, what we're showing here is a very specific usage level. It's sort of an industry standard benchmark of 1,000 kilowatt hours for electric and 50 CCF or 5 MCF of natural gas per month. We refer to this as the shopping values because this is sort of the industry standard benchmarking approach. So at that level, our bill, this is through January, our bill was $146.48. Austin was right below us, just 4 cents below us. So we stack up very well across the country, but we also measure within our own state here. So Adrian, move to the next slide if you don't mind. So this is another slide that my team produces every month. It's that same shopping value level. It's 1,000 kilowatt hours and 5 MCF of gas. This is the combined electric and gas residential bill comparison. And you can see we have that same yellow star by San Antonio, and you see the same $146.48. And you've got Austin, it's $146.44, so just that 4 cents below us. And then, you know, we stack up against El Paso and Houston and Corpus and Dallas. Those are the 3 primary deregulated markets where you have a retail electric choice, Houston, Corpus, and Dallas. Now, I have starred Austin with a green star. Adrian, don't flip the slide yet. Here's why I've starred Austin with the green star. This view, like I said, is at 1,000 kilowatt hours and 5 MCF. The next slide shows a different usage level. About 20% of our customers use a lot more than 1,000. In fact, they're around the 2,000 kilowatt hours or above per month. So the next slide shows the same comparison against all of these entities, but at a higher usage level, 2,000 kilowatt hours and 6 MCF. And I want you to hunt for the green star and the yellow star. Okay, Adrian, go to the next slide, please. Okay, so when there's only 6 bars, it's not hard to find the stars that I've added. We are, at this usage level, we are by far the lowest in the state. We stack up very well. Austin Energy, that was just a hair below us at a lower usage level, is now one of the most expensive in the state. In fact, they're the most expensive, obviously, out of the 6 that I'm showing you here. So what causes that? Well, that's what we're going to talk about this summer. The rate design matters. Austin has a rate design that works really well for their community, the specific composition of their community. For rate geeks like myself, we call it an inclining block pricing structure. What that means is there's a bucket of kilowatt hours that they sell at one price. If you as a user consume more than that bucket of kilowatt hours, you sort of get graduated up to the next bucket of kilowatt hours, and those are sold to you at a higher price. And if you use all of that bucket of kilowatt hours, you go to a third bucket and you pay a higher price for that one. So it's a higher volumetric pricing the more you use. And Austin actually has 5 tiers of an inclining block pricing structure. So by the time you're up to 2,000 kilowatt hours, I believe you're into their 5th tier. And I don't have that pricing in front of me. I should have prepared better and brought it to tell you. But you can see the impact that has, is that the bill just doesn't compare very well against the other cities. But if you think about Austin as a community, that's the rate design structure that works for them. We don't think that something that complex and something that's, really charges a lot more for higher users is something that would really work and resonate in our community because of the composition of our community. One of the assumptions that people tend to make is that high income equals high usage. And certainly it's true that higher income or wealthy individuals tend to have bigger homes and they do have high usage. But what we also see at the same exact rate is limited income folks that have high usage. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of which is sometimes they have more people living with them. Sometimes they just can't afford to invest in energy efficiency measures that can help to bring down their bill. So we see the same level of instances of limited income and high income folks having very high consumption. And so with what we try to do in this community, that just doesn't work for us. So that's one sort of little taste of why rate design matters. What we'll talk about this summer is a lot of different rate designs and what the objectives of those rate designs are. And we'll talk about what our objectives are in this community and how to match up the objectives with rate designs that accomplish those specific objectives. So that's the content that I had for you tonight. It was, again, trying to be pretty high level, but in a couple of weeks, we'll come back and we'll get to sort of the next level of depth. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions before I hand it off to our next presenter. And Adrian, you can move to the next slide if you want.
I think we're going to hold our questions to the last 30 minutes. You can hang around.
Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, our next presenter is Rick Luna. He is responsible for, he has a big responsibility, our STEP program. And he's going to tell you all about it right now. Rick?
All right. Thank you, Chad. Make sure you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. As Chad mentioned, I'll be talking about our STEP program. And just to give you some context on why we're talking about STEP, we've talked a lot about affordability tonight. We've also talked about how rate design impacts the customer's experience with their bill. What we want to do is talk about the other way that we help customers in terms of their bill is helping them save energy, helping them translate that into bill savings. And so we do that through our STEP program. And so if we go to the next slide, Adrian. The STEP program has been around for some time. Back in 2009, working with the City of San Antonio and Mayor Hardberger, there was a vision that was presented for, how could we really make a meaningful contribution or investment in helping customers save energy and save money. And through that process, make this transition to what we've called the fifth fuel. And so it was a mechanism for also reducing our need to generate power, reduce the amount of emissions that were created in our environment, reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. And so you see there, we've got this graphic element. This is back from 2009. This was the vision, is conservation and demand response being an important part of our generation portfolio, along with renewables, coal, nuclear, and natural gas, and having that blend of resources to serve our community's needs. So if we go to the next slide, Adrian. And so we worked with the City of San Antonio at the request of the community and put together a package that ultimately went to our board and the City Council as the Save for Tomorrow Energy Plan, or what we've called STEP. And we had an ordinance that was approved, and it set out goals for CPS Energy to deliver by 2020 771 megawatts of a demand reduction, which is equivalent to a large power plant, a large coal power plant. So that was intentionally established as a goal, as a vision for the community. We also had a budget, an allowable budget to spend towards that goal, and we had other objectives. We wanted to, besides delaying the need to generate or to add generation capacity, we wanted to help customers save energy. This is both residential and commercial and multifamily and all of our customers. We wanted to support job creation and economic growth. And again, we wanted to reduce the amounts of emissions and air pollution in the community. And all of this was spelled out in that ordinance that it was approved by the City Council. If we go to the next slide. And so through STEP, we developed a full slate of programs. This gets back to the point of how we help customers save energy, manage their bill, and then effectively, have more comfort in their home as well, or their business. And so we have a slate of programs that we offer. We've grouped them here. Weatherization, which is a low-income program, makes improvements to customer homes. We've done about 30,000 homes with meaningful improvements that help the residents save up to $400 a year on their energy bill. We've got a residential energy efficiency programs for everything from air conditioning replacements that are more high efficiency, replacements of a roof with a cool roof, attic insulation, other things of that nature. We've got demand response programs that help us reduce peak during the summer. We've got very popular solar programs or solar rebate. You've probably seen the amount of solar that has gone up in our community over the last 10 years. Most of that has been rebated through this program. And then we've got commercial programs, not to be left out. We've had major lighting upgrades, building improvements by pretty much all of our large customers and our small business customers. And so really have had really a transformation in the type of technology that you see in the community compared to 10 years ago. So we go to the next slide. So we're proud to say we have delivered on STEP goals. This was a review that we did in 2019 after we achieved the goal a year early and $130 million under budget. We had a review done of what the STEP plan achieved. And so you can see in the first panel there, 1.4 terawatt hours of electricity savings. That was in FY 2019, so that was meaningful enough to power 104,000 San Antonio households. We created, on average, about 680 jobs, many of those in solar industry, weatherization, the small businesses that deliver efficiency improvements for customers. Those are jobs that did not exist before the STEP program. And then we have had meaningful emissions reductions as we committed to do. And you can see those quantified there in the third panel, 3.3 million tons of CO2 emission reductions since the beginning of STEP. So if we go to the next slide, and we've won awards for our efforts, innovation awards, awards for helping customers save energy, save money, and then incorporate new technologies in their home. So for example, we've won awards for some of our thermostat programs, for some of the messaging that we do in the summer to help alert customers of a peak day, and a competition that we introduced where we encourage customers to do a few simple things around the house that in total save quite a bit of megawatts for our community. If we go to the next slide, Adrian. Along with this STEP, in the STEP ordinance, I mentioned some of the goals that we had. There was also accountability provisions that were included in that ordinance. And the idea was that we wanted to be able to verify that the claims of participation, of energy savings, could be validated. Again, we're trying to recreate a power plant, and so it has to be real. It has to be tangible. And we need to quantify the savings that we get for our investment. And so we do that through a really robust reporting process that we established, where we every quarter submit reports to the city, laying out all of the participation trends by council district, by program, residential and commercial. And then at the end of the year, we do a third-party assessment where a firm comes in and they do a validation of the saving claims that we publish then in a report. And we just recently finished the report for our latest fiscal year, FY21. And all the reports are published. They're public documents and can be found on the City of San Antonio's sustainability website. You can go there and you see the link there at the bottom of the page. If we go to the next slide. So just to bring you up to date on where we are with STEP, as I mentioned, we did achieve the original goal a year early. And so we went to the council back in January of 2020 and asked for an additional year. We called it the STEP Bridge year to allow us to continue to develop a proposal for the next long-term phase of STEP, what we're calling Flex STEP. Excuse me. Subsequently to that, of course, COVID came along and disrupted our plans.
Rick, you're having audio trouble.
Yeah, for some reason the call dropped. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Rick. We can.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and use my computer here. Sorry about that. I don't know where I lost there, but I was talking about the STEP Bridge year that we requested in January 2020. The City Council did approve that, and then of course COVID came along, and we were not able to expend the dollars as we expected. We had to slow down some of the programs as we were not able to enter customer homes, and so we went back to the city at January of this year and asked for an additional $70 million. Which we thought would take us about a year to a year and a half to spend, and then complete the Flex Step proposal and come back to the City Council and to our board later this year for a recommendation around that Flex Step program. So we're in that second Step Bridge year currently, and you can see we marked it there with a yellow star to show you where we are. Okay, if we go to the next slide, Adrian. As I mentioned, we just completed our STEP report for the FY21 fiscal year. Even though, as I mentioned, we were impacted by COVID, we were still able to add 81 megawatts of demand reduction through programs. And just a small breakdown there of some of the things we were able to do. Last year, we weatherized 1,700 homes. Again, we were impacted by COVID, so typically that number has been around 3,600 homes, but we had to pause the program for about 6 months while we were not able to enter customer homes. That said, the solar program had a record year. 4,400 new solar systems were installed. Of course, most cases, they don't have to go in the customer home. So, and people were home, right? And they were making home improvements. So we saw a big uptake in the solar program last year. And then we had 56,000 customers who participated in some form of a rebate where we paid them dollars to make an improvement. And again, that's residential and commercial customers who participated in that 56,000 number. So if we go to the next slide. Wanted to quantify here, exactly what we're talking about, right? We talk about helping customers manage their bill, translate that into bill savings. This is some of our more popular programs we put here on the table, just to give you a sense for, how much does a customer save by, for example, in the first line there, obtaining a discount on a LED light bulb through a retailer. The typical customer will replace 5 light bulbs. And that will translate to about $12 a year in energy savings. They also get about a $9 rebate on those light bulb purchases. And so the total benefit for making that investment is $21. Of course, the larger the investment, the larger the savings through these programs. So for example, an air conditioning replacement to a more efficient unit will save energy, 3,000 kilowatt hours a year. That's $322 on a bill in a typical year, and then the rebate is about $550. So you can see that's almost $900 of benefit to the customer in that first year for that investment. And we think that's important, right? Because customers, when we survey them, we frequently ask them what's most important to them. Of course, reliability is at the top of the list, but bill, helping them save energy, save money is always right there. And this is directly how we do that. And so we wanted to share these numbers with you to give you a feel for what this looks like for a customer. If we go to the next slide, now do want to talk about the cost of the program. I think it was Corey who mentioned that every dollar we spend eventually makes its way to a customer bill. And it's no different with STEP. We make the investment in the programs. We recover that cost a year later. And so it does show up on the customer bill through the fuel adjustment that the customer pays every month as a part of it. It's not separately itemized, but it is embedded in that fuel charge. And so this shows you a comparison of that charge based on the size of the program. And currently, we're at about $70 million in our annual program cost, which translates to about $44 of bill impact to a customer with 1,000 kilowatt hours of usage. Now, if you start to increase that investment, you could double it, you could triple it. You start to see how that number adds up. And if we go to the next slide, just to kind of build the story here, that's just one element of the things that we're facing today as a utility, as a company. There are other community priorities, and there's things like our generation plan. We've talked about the Flex Power Bundle. And so this is a view of, as you start to sort of stack on some of these other community priorities, the ranges of cost that you start to talk about. And so then if we go to the next slide, these are building on each other. This gives you a bill comparison view. Chad showed some of these slides earlier. This shows you over a 12-month period how we stack up currently in terms of our customer bill. And as you can see there, what we've done is we've added in green the amount that each of these, or the amount that the customers in each of these markets pay for conservation programs, similar to our STEP program. And you can see that Austin, San Antonio, we have meaningful investments, and the cost there is meaningful in terms of the customer bill. Less so in the competitive markets. They have a requirement in state law that is a very small goal. I guess the goals are less in terms of the amount that they have to save. And so that consequently, it shows up on the bill at a smaller amount. You can see the sort of the scale there in the graph. And what we've done there in the shaded area on the top is just to show from the previous slide, those community decisions, sort of how they stack up. And really the takeaway from this is that, the scale and the timing and the velocity of those investments are important. And so we have to be careful not to become an expensive market for our customers, getting back to the discussion about affordability. So I think that's my last slide. Adrian nope, there was one more. We talked a little bit about the future. I do want to end with this slide. We talked about Flex Step and going to the city council with a recommendation for a long-term plan. We've taken a step towards that by issuing an RFP. It got lots of attention. We released it back at the end of March. And what we've done is gone out and we've asked basically the global market to give us ideas, to give us proposals for new programs, new opportunities, new technologies to continue to help our customers save energy and money. We know that we're proud of the portfolio of programs that we showed you earlier, but we know that there are other newer ideas, new innovations that have come along. And so to try to, continue to keep that portfolio fresh, we thought this RFP was an important step to bring in those ideas. And so we'll be evaluating these over the next several months, and we'll use the best of those ideas in our proposal. So I think with that, I've hit my last slide. So thank you very much for your attention this evening.
Thank you, Rudy. Let's see now, Adrian or Ann, are the folks from Bridal ready?
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay, let's just move right into that.
Should I plan to share my own screen, or Adrian will be sharing the slides?
I will share. 1 second. Let me pull it up here. My apologies.
No worries. I can also share if that's easier.
Okay, it is uploading now, and it should be displaying.
Great. So while the slides are uploading, good evening, everyone. Thanks for staying as long as you did. This is a really interesting and important conversation, and I will be presenting rather slides tonight, and my colleague Algiros is also on the line, and he's probably participate during the Q&A section. Our colleague Ahmed Faraki is out of office this week, and you'll probably see him in other meetings. So with that, let's just dive into discussing the trends shaping the future of the electric power industry. I want to mention at the front part of this presentation that we really focus on the trends for the electric sector at this time, and we have not gotten into gas utility trends because there are lots of things going on at this time, and those trends for electric and gas are not necessarily in the same direction. So we'll probably need to discuss gas at another time. So know that this presentation mainly focuses on the electric power industry. So next slide, please. So what we're going to be doing in the next 25 minutes is to try and hit each of these mega trends affecting the investment decisions, pricing in the electric power industry. So we've identified 6 of these trends. The first one is flat to declining load growth that's happened over the past decade. The second trend is that increasing renewable capacity that's happening all over the country. The third trend is the increase in distributed generation. So all of us, the consumers of electricity, are gradually turning into the producers of electricity. Sometimes there's a new term called prosumers to refer to the customers who are also generating electricity. The next trend is increasing building and transportation electrification. Our fifth trend is increasing importance of load flexibility. This is the idea that for the longest time, supply followed load. If the load increased, supply increased. If the load decreased, supply decreased. But we're at a time where, because of the increased renewable integration, it's really important for load to change and respond to the changes in supply. Our sixth trend is the changes in regulatory models, frameworks, and as well as rate design approaches. Rate design is extremely important to facilitate and transition into this new future of the power sector. So the timing of this RAC meeting and discussions is very timely in that regard. The next slide, please. So, okay, let's talk about our first trend, which is, tendency that we observe across the country in which the load growth is becoming flat or even declining in a lot of places. And what's happened is after the 2018 financial crisis, load growth has never recovered. And it started to follow this really flat and again, or even declining trajectory. And you could see this from this graph where we plotted annual electricity sales in, again, terawatt hours by class for the nation as a whole, US as a whole, and CPS Energy. And the solid lines represent total sales for US, and the dashed lines represent total sales for CPS Energy. So as you can see, the picture is very similar. But CPS Energy has been, I guess, a more fortunate compared to the US average in that there was still some positive growth in at least residential and commercial classes, although there was a declining growth rates for the industrial classes, but overall total sales grew by 1.3% on average. So the reason this is important is that the prior presenters talked about the revenue requirement that has to be collected to be able to pay for the costs. And to the extent that you have more sales in the system, you can spread those costs over more sales, which kind of reduces the pressure on the rates. So that was the basis for my comment that CPS has been a bit more fortunate compared to the rest of the US in terms of the load growth. The next slide. Again, I should mention that the reason for this trajectory is that the energy efficiency programs like what Rick mentioned, the STEP program and other similar programs have been very successful over the past decade, basically putting the brakes on load growth. There's this thing called organic conservation, which is essentially the tendencies of the new generation and in making sort of more conservative mind energy decisions, show more focus and emphasis on the energy efficient appliances and so on. And last but not least, the proliferation of distributed energy resources such as rooftop solar, because when there's generation coming from rooftop solar, that means that the grid sales are lower as a result. The next slide, please. So next, we look at again, staying with the same team, looking at the load growth. We look at the average residential consumption for the US as a whole, and Texas and CPS Energy. Based on this chart, we see that the average monthly consumption per residential customer declined since 2010 in all regions. Again, this is explained. This is the reason. The reason being that there's more energy efficiency, more conservation, and distributed energy generation going on. And annual consumption per customer has declined by 5.2% for CPS Energy, and it declined 8.6% for the nation as a whole. And for Texas, the decrease was around 4.9%. As Chad mentioned in his presentation, Texas customers consume considerably more electricity compared to the rest of the nation due to regional differences in climate and housing structures and fuel sources and so on. So it's always tricky to make these comparisons, but again, the snapshot is that there's decline in residential consumption per customer all across the board. Next slide, please. So let's now look at the average real residential electricity prices by region over the same time frame. We're looking over the course of the past decade. The average real electricity price for CPS residential customers was roughly the same in 2019 as it was in 2009 in real dollars. So there is some increase in the interim period from 2012 to 2015 through 17, and then after that there's a decline in the real residential electricity price per customer. And then if you look at the national average, there's a declining trend there, and Texas average is also declining. This is again one of those tricky things to compare. Even though we are comparing all the bundled utilities for both national Texas and CPS Energies as a bundled utility, meaning that generation, transmission, and distribution is all undertaken by CPS Energy. There are just so many different things going on in this picture. There could be things like in certain areas, grid modernization activities happening a lot faster, or investments in renewable generation has happened a lot earlier than later. So those are some of the things behind these trends, but important to note that CPS Energy rates are below the national average and as well as Texas average over this time frame. So the scale of this chart is from 10 cents to 14 cents. So even though the differences are not humongous, CPS Energy residential rates are definitely on the lower end. The next slide, please. So we basically go through the same idea and same exercise for the commercial customers. Again, the story is that CPS Energy's commercial customers rates was roughly the same in 2019 as they were in 2009 in real dollars. And the same trends are playing out. There's a declining trend for the national, but for CPS Energy, there was an interim increase. But starting in 2017 through 2019, there's a declining trend in the average real electricity price. And also, I should highlight that the CPS Energy average rate is below the national level. So there's still that relationship for that we see for residential is retained here. The next slide, please. So this is the same analysis for the industrial class. Here, the picture is a bit different in the sense that for residential and commercial, CPS energy rates were below the national average. But in this case, for the industrial customers, CPS energy rates are above the national average. But again, I want to highlight the scale of this graph. So when we're talking about these differences, at the maximum level, it's about 2 cents, and when we get to the end of the time period, it's a little over 1 cent. The trend is the same as the residential and commercial rates in that the 2019 rates are almost similar to the 2009 rates, and there's the decline starting from 2017 through 2019. The next slide, please. So that was the first mega trend, and the second one is the increase in renewable capacity. So as of 2020, there were about 30 states and DC have committed to renewable and clean energy standards, and the degree of ambitiousness in these clean energy plans and renewable portfolio standards is really widely different. In Texas, there is a relatively less stringent renewable portfolio standard, but economics and market forces made wind and solar a very attractive option in Texas. So even though the RPS target was about 5.8 megawatts, the renewable penetration in Texas has exceeded 28 gigawatts as of 2019. And again, there are many different reasons and forces that leads to this accelerated renewable adoption. Federal government offers production and investment subsidies and credits, energy efficiency, electric vehicle tax credits to support the growth of clean energy is happening pretty aggressively all around the country. And in addition to states committing to these clean energy goals, also individual cities commit to either reducing their carbon footprint substantially or becoming net zero. And CPS Energy has committed to an 80% reduction in net carbon emissions by 2040 and to become carbon neutral by 2050. So CPS Energy's commitment to clean energy is really one of the most ambitious commitments that we've observed from different cities and states all across the country. The next slide, please. So this is basically making the same point that across all regions, there's an overwhelming amount of queued capacity that is planned to be renewable. So not only these commitments are happening, but also they're reflected in the plans. For ERCOT, as of 2020, more than 95% of the capacity in queue is wind, solar, and storage. The next slide, please. And that as the U.S. Over the next 15 years, capacity and generation from solar and wind is expected to dramatically increase from 15% to about 30%. And this number is much higher for Texas, based on the Texas Reliability Entity numbers. The expectations are that the share of solar and wind capacity will increase from 35% to 45% as of 2035 in Texas. Next slide, please. So our third trend is that there's a substantial and consistent trend in increasing distributed generation. So when we say distributed generation, this is mostly solar PVs, rooftop solar in most places, but there are other distributed sources of renewable electricity as well. The batteries, complementing the solar generation. And there are, again, reasons behind this accelerated trends. The technology costs have fallen substantially over the past decade, and there were generous, and there still are federal investment tax credits and net metering implementations. So in Texas, there was over 27,000 residential net metering customers as of 2020, with 250 megawatts of capacity. And CPS customers make up 61% of all net metering customers in Texas and 71% of the PV capacity. So CPS is really a leader in integrating distributed generation resources installed by the customers, and motivating and supporting customers as well. The next slide, please. So in many cases, what we're seeing is that customers are not only installing solar PVs, but they're also installing battery storage, distributed storage to pair their PV units. And according to Solar Energy Industries report, as of 2025, more than 25% of all behind-the-meter solar systems will be paired with storage. So sometimes in the industry, this is again seen as sort of the beginnings of grid defection. Now the customers have the solar as well as storage, so they can use the solar generation that they generate during the day at night. They wouldn't need the grid, so they would just defect the grid. So there are those arguments as well, but our opinion is that we're still ways away from that vision to materialize. But it's important to note that customers are really taking an interest in being prosumers and investing in these resources to support both their clean energy goals as well as improve reliability and resiliency outcomes. The next slide, please. So the fourth trend is increasing building and transportation electrification. One of the pathways to decarbonization is increased electrification of the transportation sector as well as the heating sector. All of these heating and building electrification efforts are being encouraged through various incentives and mandates. Sometimes mandates, bans, gas bans in new constructions. There are a lot of activities and incentive mechanisms provided to the transportation sector in terms of investment of charging infrastructure. So this could be potentially very good news for electric utilities, because the more electricity is consumed for heating and transportation, the more the sales increase, which means that all the costs can be spread over a larger sales amount, reducing the pressure on the rates. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is in order to support all this electrification, there needs to be really a lot of investment that's happening on the grid side, as well as this transition will also require ramping up the customer support programs, providing rebates and subsidies and so on, so that the adoption happens. But the other scenario that could play out is that if the customers really go down the route of installing PVs and storage, but at the same time electrifying their houses and owning EVs, then that means that they would use their own electricity to power their own home, which may not boost the electricity sales as much as envisioned for the utility system. So again, this is something that we will get to see in the years to come, how that is shaping up. The next slide, please. And I'm just gonna mention that, like with everything else, there is not a clear story on electrification of buildings and the different mechanisms to sort of push electrification. There are certain regions across the country, mostly at the West Coast, currently moving towards discussing the future role of natural gas, and some places even enacted gas bans on new constructions. But there are other places that have banned the ban of natural gas systems. So there's a really sort of polarized situation right now, but that is not really changing the fact that there's fast and expedited movement towards electrification in many places across the country. Next slide, please. Similarly, electrification of transportation is happening. So you may have seen some of the Super Bowl ads that there's a big push from OEMs, car manufacturers, to increase their electric vehicle models. The situation is was pretty dire in the US up until recently, that only sort of 1.8 million, up to 1.8 to 2 million as of 2021 cars on the road were electric, and then they represented only 1.8% of the market share as of 2020. But there's a rapid cost decline, and charging infrastructure is increasing, and the models of EVs are increasing. Again, you may have seen the F-150 electric truck. So the expectation is that the electrification of transportation is also going to accelerate in the near future, and which will again require a lot of different considerations for distribution system planning and to manage the new load coming through with that charging behavior from customers. And I'm going to try to wrap this up in 5 minutes because we really need to put good time allotted to Q&A. The next slide, please. I think I've made this point that if the expectations will materialize in that as of 2030, some outlets expect that there could be 20 million EVs could be on the road. That we've recently completed a study that estimated that in order to support that 20 million EVs on the road, the electric sector would require $75 to $125 billion of investments by 2030. And that this investment would need to go to having more generation storage to meet higher energy demand and peak loads. Some of it will need to go to T&D upgrades to service peak demand, to harden the grid. And then some of it would need to go to the chargers and charging infrastructure to provide sufficient home, work, and public charging infrastructure. So a lot of investment may be necessary to support this growth. The next slide, please. So this is a really, not that others are not important, but this one is as I would call a low-hanging fruit. The importance of load flexibility is increasing, and load flexibility is becoming essential to address the challenges of this evolving grid. And what we mean by load flexibility is to be able to reduce demand when there is a signal or request from the system operator that the system is experiencing really very stressed outcomes, just like the experience that Texas had during the winter storm, that the demand was much higher than supply. Then the customers step in and they reduce their demand to help out the system. So, but we can't really rely on this voluntary mechanism as the sole tool. So there has to be a good level of investment to automate some of this demand response capabilities through smart devices, smart thermostats, smart water heaters, and grid efficient interactive buildings. And there's a lot of potential to be able to manage the peak demand with this load flexibility potential. Again, we've also completed a study that found that nearly 200 gigawatts of cost-effective load flexibility potential can be achieved by 2030, representing 20% of the 2030 US peak. So what this means is that if we can figure out how to implement load flexibility, we would need to build 20% less peak capacity than would be needed otherwise. The next slide, please. So the sixth trend is that regulatory frameworks should also evolve, because the system is evolving. It's not entirely consistent with this new reality that we would still regulate the electric power utilities with the construct from 100 years ago. And then there has to be an innovation on the regulatory side and also the rate design side. So some of these activities are happening across the country. So performance-based regulation is gaining a lot of traction, which gives utilities more opportunities to sort of recover their investments, but also improve their performance as well as their innovation. The next slide, please. And then, similar to the innovations on the regulatory front, we also need a lot of innovation on the rate design front, because now we have these smart meters and we have these connected devices, and the customers are really ready to embrace these technologies and devices, and they're looking for more options to save in their bills and to be more active agents in their consumption decisions. So in the US, there are a lot of utilities expanding their rate design choices to become more customer-centric organizations. On the left-hand side of this chart, there's a spectrum of different rate designs that could be offered to the customers, and each rate design comes with its own risk and reward paradigm. So on the very bottom of this arc, there's this thing called guaranteed bill. This is basically the customer pays the same bill month after month, but that there's an important hedging premium built into that. The customers pay a lot for that peace of mind. And at the end of at the other end of the spectrum, we have the real-time prices. And for real-time prices, there's a lot of risk associated with it. There could be a lot of risk volatility, but the bill savings upside is also there. So what's happening is that utilities are providing a smarter default rate to their customers. So currently default rates are in most places is flat volumetric rates, but then that smart default rate becomes sometimes sort of more dynamic, time varying rate structure, which is which gives customers bill saving opportunities. And then around that smarter default, offering customers different rate choices so that they could choose a rate that is most consistent with their lifestyle choices and what they want to achieve for the environment, for their community as well. So we'll in the coming discussions, we will talk a lot more in detail about what each of these rate design choices are, what are the objectives, and how to make decisions about what to offer to customers, because with everything else, there are lots of trade-offs are involved. So with that, I think that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. That was quite good. Okay, we're going to go through the list. I think I've got everybody down here that's on the call. This time we'll do it alphabetically, starting at the top, and then we will we'll move through these. And when I call your name, if you would, turn your video on, unmute, and ask your questions either for CPS or the Bridal Group, and we'll get started. First one is Kurt Anastasio. Kurt, still on? Okay, you probably had to drop off. Didi Balmaris. Didi, are you on?
I'm here.
Do you have any questions, Didi?
I do.
Go ahead.
When y'all were talking about the residential electric prices and the commercial/industrial, the percentage decrease, why was there such a big difference between residential and commercial? If I remember correctly, residential was like 12%, and then on the commercial industrial side, it was like 24 or 26%. That's my question.
So yeah, let me confirm the numbers, Didi, first. Yeah, so for the residential rates, the decrease over time is 17% less than the national average, and then for the commercial, it's again the same number. So when you said decrease, are you talking about the decrease over this 10-year time frame, or are you comparing them to each other? Yeah, so I think fundamentally that's a question about the cost of service. So the way CPS Energy sets these rates, and again, we will have more detailed conversations about how these rates are determined. Each class's cost is allocated over the sales in that particular class. And I know that over this 10-year time frame, CPS Energy had to make different kinds of investments, and the billing determinants have changed. So I think that the reasons behind why the rates are what they are is going to be a lot clearer when we start looking at the cost of service. You're muted, Didi.
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
When was the last time CPS Energy did a cost of service?
Chad, are you able to take that question?
Sure, yes. I can certainly chime in. Let me get my video going here again. Excuse me. We did a cost of service about 4 or 5 years ago. It's based on our fiscal year 2017. With COVID and the pandemic has really kind of thrown things upside down. So we didn't really want to do one on the last year or the year before that. And when we do a cost of service, we take it and we normalize all of the anomalies for that specific year. So it's good for a while.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you are on mute, sir.
No, I just, is that all Dee Dee had? The next one is Jim Berg. Jim, are you there?
Reed, it doesn't look like Jim's here.
Okay, Andy Castillo?
I don't have a question at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Norm Dugas?
I don't have anything, Reed.
Okay, thanks, Norm. Okay, Wayne Eddington? Wayne?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, Anthony Edwards? Jack Everton?
Any questions, Reed?
I'm sorry, Jack, what did you say?
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Michael, connect.
Yeah, I have a couple questions, and perhaps they can just be brought back later, and I can just sort of pose them up right now. Back on the CPS slide deck, slide 31, where we're showing how much more energy we're using here in Texas versus some of the other states. I'm just curious a little bit deeper into some of those numbers as to why it's so much higher. Is it mostly weather? Is it because we're not efficient? Is it because we have a lot more industry? So I'm just curious a little bit more about what goes into those differences. And again, we don't have to answer that now, but like to hear more about that in the future. And then the other question, and again, this we could bring back. I'd like to understand a little bit more about some of the cost differences between R&R, which is repair and replacement, and O&M, which is operation and maintenance, because I have a feeling there's a little bit of a crossover. I don't understand, is R&R just like really big stuff like power plants, or is it also replacing, distribution transformers in the neighborhood? So, and again, we can bring that back, but would like to understand a little bit more about what the difference is in those two cost areas.
Yeah, Michael, absolutely. If you've got these questions, that's a good way to do it. Let's get them out here, and then we'll get your answers to them. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great. Anita Ledbetter. Anita.
Yes, hi. First, I would like to say thank you to our presenters today. I think this was a wealth of information. I have a lot of thoughts but no questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Anita. Okay, Dana McGinnis. Dana.
Thank you. Thank you. Kind of a follow-up to Mike's question. First of all, if customers in Texas are using twice as much energy as the rest of the country, and yet the bills in California are 3 or 4 times higher than Texas, what's the difference?
Y'all want to take a shot at that off the cuff, or you want to log that question and come back?
So
that's up to Rattle.
Well, what I was going to say was let us come back in a couple of weeks because we've got a couple of questions about the difference between Texas and some of these other states.
Chad, this is Adrian. You're breaking up, Chad. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let us come back in 2 weeks and we'll provide some content on that.
And maybe wanting to clarify, though, I think we should also clarify that some of the numbers we discussed today were electricity consumption, whereas the total energy is a combination of both electricity and gas. So we really need to break that question into those two pieces and talk about the climates and the fuel mix that is used for that cooling and heating, as well as the rate structures in California versus Texas. So it's a very rich question, and I agree that we should definitely discuss that.
Can you put it back to us in pretty simple terms about just answer that question simply? That's what I would like.
Well, there should be quite a bit of published data on.
There is.
You took it from the 1,000 and the different levels. Okay, I don't want to use an average, but if you can find certain levels, either 1,000, 1,200, 1,500, whatever you think, that give us in 3 brackets. A user in California, a user in take 2 or 3, 4, 5 states, or it's probably available in some place by all the states. So whatever you can do, I'm with Dana, kind of give us a perspective of how we stand on the electric side. That would be helpful.
A follow-up, please, Reed.
Sure.
I'd like some explanation of how the solar system installations and rebate work at SAWS, and then what happens to that customer's bill, for instance, and what happens to sort of the maintenance allocated to that particular connection.
Okay. Good. Okay, we'll take that one. I've got it down.
Okay. That's for future then?
Well, I bet they don't have the numbers right there. They can talk in general, I'm sure, under the STEP program of what they've got there, but it kind of depends on what units, what size of solar system they put in, and how much the house uses it, how much they sell back. So it might be better.
Then let me throw out some comments then. Theoretically, then, say you get some kind of rebate on an installed system from the federal government, the state government, even from CPS, and say your bill is $100, and who pays for that at what proportion, and then what happens to the bill afterwards? And if the bill goes down, let's just say by 2/3, 1/2, or whatever, don't you still have to have a connection from the regular CPS for when the sun's not shining, you turn your lights on at night, as an example? And I'd like an explanation for what happens to the overall maintenance bill for CPS Energy when you reduce somebody's bill by giving them a rebate on a solar system. Don't you still have the same amount of maintenance expense for that particular hookup? Or if the line falls down, are they still paying their regular fair share of this? So what I'm getting at is that if you put enough of these solar panels on, you're basically taking capital away from your neighbor because he doesn't have a solar system on his roof that he didn't get credits for. And so I'd like a little detail on that and who's paying for it and what kind of revenues and what kind of maintenance expense that puts on everybody else. Is that clear enough?
I think I got it. I'll write it up, Dana, and try to get it right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Excuse me, this is Wayne, and I can probably answer some of those questions for you. I have solar panels, I drive an electric vehicle, and several other things. I built this house and put a lot of extra Conex blocks in it, so it was already low, and this is a pretty good sized house. Back in the day, the CPS would do half of the bill for the solar panels, and you would get another 30% from the federal government. Now that's down to, I think, about $2,500 for the CPS, and it's still 30% from the federal government. As far as any maintenance now, from this end, I can't tell you any maintenance because I haven't seen any, and I've had them over 10 years. So I don't have any issue that I'm aware of with the connection. The connection is still the same. It's just that when in the daytime I'm putting power back into the grid, at nighttime I'm using the grid. I'm getting Tesla batteries here probably hopefully in the near future, and so that'll put me in a whole different little category. But that's kind of how it works. Now I can't answer for the maintenance part.
A comment on that, Wayne. I'm not saying that it doesn't lower your bills and everything else, but what about the maintenance for the entire system in San Antonio? Your bill's gone down, but it doesn't reduce the requirement for even the paying employees' salaries. To pay for the trucks that drive around. If your bill goes down by 3/4, I mean, then what if everybody did that? Then the bills for the whole city would be down by 3/4. And how would you pay for the trucks? How would you pay for repairing the lines? See what I'm getting at? I mean, there's a inflection point.
I don't want to jump out of turn, but I think the question for CPS, and I think this is a really good point, is that there's also the value of the energy that's being generated locally, that's being fed into the grid, that from those solar systems that are connected during the day, that's not that we don't have to generate at the plants and bring in here and buy fuel for. So that is a good question, but those solar systems are also providing power into the grid as well, so that there's that value.
Well,
let
me just make a comment. Let me make a comment here. I see what the overall discussion is and the concern, and it's a long-term overall issue. It's not just one or two situations, and so what we have to really get behind and get people understanding is as we go through this, what I'm considering, local installations or distributed installations. What does that do to the overall rate structure? And that's what we should be getting into in the rate structure, because we can make assumptions about so many people putting so much in, costing so much. And I think the way we look at that impact, Dana, is through a rate model. And that's it's probably so complicated. We probably can't just sit here and noodle it out, in our heads. We're going to have to think about it in a model. And I think that's a good thing for us to study when we get to that point. And I've got it down. And I think that's, Dana, actually the only way we're really going to understand it is if we looked at it holistically as to what is the effect of this distributed solar growth.
So let me chime in just real quickly, then we can move on. Yes, Dana is asking all of the right questions. Wayne, that perspective is extremely helpful because you've got the customer perspective on what happens when you get solar. These issues are the issues that every utility on the face of the earth are dealing with right now. And we will absolutely get into all of this in the coming weeks. I think our agenda for our next meeting is going to be talking about costs of serving customers and what's fixed costs versus variable costs. And we're going to talk about rate designs and what are the objectives of different types of rate designs and the impact that has on customer behavior. So we are going to get into all of these topics. Thank you so much.
Okay. Dana, is that okay with you? We all right there?
Yes, sir. Yes,
okay.
Sir.
Let's go on to Anne Marie.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
I don't have any questions at this time either. It was very, very valuable information, and it's a lot to digest. And I thank also the presenters.
Thank you. Okay. Peter Onfrey. Peter, are you on?
Yes, sir. Yes, Reed, I don't need an answer right now, but I do want to put the question out there. On slide 25, regarding the rate increase and the proposed high and low, the current legislature that just passed and the mandated weatherization and the taxed, the rate payers supported bonds, how that's going to factor into that. And if CPS, I'm assuming that CPS is going to be affected by that mandate and the opportunity to access bonds to pay for the weatherization, and how that will factor into that equation regarding the increase on the Storm Uri portion of it. And I know it's an extended 25-year plan, but that's my question related to that. I don't need an answer right now. Just want to put it out there for when we can get an answer to how that's going to factor in.
Yeah, well, that brings up a better, not a better, but a more, a broader question I should answer, Peter. We probably need to have somebody give us a briefing on the three pieces of legislation that did get passed and what it's going to do and what it's not going to do at some point. So I think that's important, and that's in that deal. So I've got that down. We'll get that on the agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, Femi, you on? Thought he was. He was earlier.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, Peter, go ahead. Oh, no, Femi, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. I knew you were on, but I just couldn't find you.
Somewhere. Yeah, nothing at this time. I guess I'm just going to see as things evolve, and the questions will definitely come. But I wanted to say thanks to Rudy, Corey, Chad, Rick, and Dr. Sajichi. Good presentations, good insights. And at this time, no questions.
Okay, thanks. All right. Alberto Rodriguez. Michael Sanchez. Hi.
Yeah, Reed, thanks. Thank you to all the presenters today. Thank you for the wealth of information. It was a fire hose of information at one time, but thank you very much. I have no questions at this time. I do have some thoughts, but let me gather them up, and then I can articulate them at a later time.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Michael. Okay, now we're over to Eloisa.
Hey there. Can you hear me?
I can now. Thanks.
Awesome. I do have a lot of questions. I also just want to recognize that we're over our time. And so I want to acknowledge that, and not expecting everybody to answer all these questions today, but I'm just going to kind of roll them off. In terms of the community needs slide, I really want to know how much all of those programs actually, what is the amount for all those programs? What are we dedicating to that? I also want to understand a little bit more about who's benefiting from some of these programs. One of the other things was understanding the data around past due balances. The slide only went back to March of 2020. That is when the pandemic started. In April of 2020, there was a 14.5% unemployment rate. And so I really want to understand what the trend is prior to the pandemic as well. And I also want to understand the utility burden of some of these additional pieces that we're wanting to evaluate or propose. Mentioned a high-low potential rate increase, and that could affect, if somebody's on a limited income, that it may be a higher percentage for them. And so since we have community members that pay, upwards of 20% of their income on utilities, those are rising costs when they may not have done anything for those to be rising costs. So I really want to understand that kind of impact on our community members, because those with limited incomes or fixed incomes are going to have to what are they going to trade off? Less medication, less food to be able to pay those bills. So I want to understand utility burden and how these rates are impacting others. One of the other things was under the Texas competitiveness slide deck. I really do want to understand a little bit more about the Senate Bill number 3 from Abbott, and really understand how is that going to impact the rates of the weatherization. Is going to be a requirement. So is that being something that we're talking about in what we're doing? The other piece I really wanted to understand was a little bit more about the differences between Memphis, Austin, San Antonio, El Paso, and Denver's the rate structures. And we mentioned that 20% of our customers are using twice as much as others. And I really want to understand, there was a comment that was made that Austin's, the more you use, the more you pay. I would like to be understand what is it that we are doing, because their model seems to really incentivize reducing your use. And so I really want to be able to compare that difference. And are we actually incentivizing reducing your use? So I want to use that. And then I want to know, why doesn't that work here? Because that was a really bold statement. It doesn't work for us. I want to know why it doesn't work for us. And in terms of the STEP program, we talked about the whole goal was really around delaying new generation. And so that is why I'm trying to connect the dots from things that we're saying in other slides around needing to reduce and delay generation. But we aren't necessarily incentivizing using less and having a more consistent or streamlined rate structure and incentive to be able to do that. And I also want to know, where does all that funding go? All the different programs that were listed for residential and commercial. I really want to know how much is invested in that as well, and what's the benefit? What is our return on that? And I want to see what the impact of STEP has been on different residential customers, business and industry. I want to understand the benefits of those programs to those different users in the community. I also want to have a real clarity around some of those programs. What is actually going to a third-party organization, or what is going directly to customers? I know some of these programs are run by a third-party administrator, so I really want to understand the direct benefit to the community. And then slide 48 and 49 talked about future decisions in different cities. And I noticed in slide 49, we're talking about our future decisions, but we're not talking about what the future decisions of some of these other cities are. And so visually, it shows San Antonio just having a risk of having an increased cost, but it doesn't compare apples to apples. I'd really like to better understand what other cities are planning also for their future and are mentioning quite a bit of that, especially since a lot of cities have adopted climate goals and are wanting to get to that. And then in terms of Brattle's presentation, we talked about load growth, and I really want to compare that or really connect that to population growth and the development, the increased population and development in Texas and specifically in San Antonio. We're supposed to be doubling size by 2040. And then in terms of the comment that Dana made around solar, I'm also thinking the same question. I really want to understand who is benefiting from that. Again, where is the funding going? Is it going to a third party, or is it going to specific residents or ratepayers? And I want to understand the impact on who's taking advantage of these solar programs? When I worked for the city years ago, a lot of these solar installations were really up north, those that could afford a lot of those kinds of initiatives or improvements in their home. So again, low-income residents are not going to replace their roof or replace their HVAC system. So really wanting to understand, again, who is benefiting from these programs and who is really just not able to participate. And I really want to understand that connection, all of those connections back to those that are being disconnected, those that can afford their utilities, and really understanding the impact of, is the investment that we're making as a municipal utility and these programs actually alleviating some of the burden, or are we just continuing to burden those that don't have access? And I do have a lot more questions, but I think these were my main ones.
Okay.
And I think that's it opens the door for more conversation. I would like to recommend that we take time maybe on the next meeting to even have time to actually discuss some of this. I'm wondering if some of the individuals that don't have comments now or questions now are just really needing to kind of take this all in and be able to kind of come back with a little bit more clarity about their questions. Thanks.
Okay.
I second Eloisa on her last point. We definitely need to have some more time for discussion on our end.
Yeah, well, we need more time, or we need to try to cover less items. That's part of the thing. This was a pretty broad first meeting. We'll try to get the meetings and the agenda narrowed down and focused so that we can take these. There's so many questions here. I ran out of room writing them all, but we need to focus these sessions on specific items. And I agree with Dee Dee and Eloisa. We will have to have longer question and answer time, or we just won't understand them. So I think our big challenge here is going to be set out a series of programs here that are a little more focused on exactly what we're talking about. We're over the time limit. I apologize for that. I'll hold my questions, and thank you all very much. And we'll be working on this as we go through the next couple of weeks to see if we can get a little bit more focused on specific issues in the next meeting. Thank y'all.